I'm Lorraine Landreau, and I started in 1981. And we worked on production. In the spring we'd pack trees, and in the fall we planted them. In the spring we planted them, in the fall we packed them.
I'm Eleanor Wilson, and I started in 1973. I worked for 30 years, I guess. And yes, I was on the packing line and on the planting and weeding, doing little seedlings, pulling the weeds out, and yeah. And I enjoyed my work very much there.
And I'm Evelyn Chambers, and I started in '75 and finished in 2010. And I also did a little bit of everything. Worked on the packing line, worked on the makeup belt, tied trees, run the Saxmeyers, run the lift, and picked seed and hoed and sorted seed, a little bit of everything.
But anyway.
There was lots of fun things
Yes.
that went on as well.
Oh,
That's why it was so enjoyable working there.
I missed it, yes.
Yeah.
yeah,
very
it was
much.
the people. You enjoyed working
Yeah.
with the people.
Yeah.
Some of the jobs weren't always fun, but it was the
No.
people that you shared them with every day.
There was, 30 women on
30, yeah.
on
There
the
was,
belt?
There was 2 belts, one on each side of the
Yeah.
shed.
Mhm.
And about 30 women, that were working in there.
And they were set up beside the belts like this, and you were in your pally and counted your 25 trees and put them on there and put them on there. And when they got to the other end, like Evelyn was on the Saxmeyer, what you call the Saxmeyer, it's like a baler. It was a big arm come around and it tied the things, and then she flipped
Tied the
out.
bundles in
Yeah.
2 places, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then at the end there, they didn't use those anymore.
No,
The
we were
Saxmeyer.
wrapping
We
them
were
and
tying by hand, remember, ourselves,
Yeah, yeah.
or with the plastic.
with putting plastic
Putting
around.
in the last few years, yeah. They
Yeah.
wrapped plastic around.
And then at the end, from the Saxmeyer, they went into a pelly, did
Pelly.
they not?
Yeah, a couple
And
guys.
then it went into cold storage.
Right. Some went up the belt outside and then they healed them in.
Yeah.
And most of them, I think, they kept in cold storage.
Yeah, at
They
the end,
found
they were doing that rather than healing them in.
right.
Caragana, even though it was smelly, it was still the best tree. to
Caragana,
find.
yeah.
Yeah.
Some were too big because
Yeah.
you're trying to count and you'd have, sometime your bundle was huge,
Yeah.
like lilac.
Yeah.
You know, trying to get 25
The
lilac in
arm
your
full.
arm and then set it on the belt, you could hardly tie it at the other end because the arm for the Saxmeyer hardly came around it to tie it.
Yeah.
So some were really hard counting.
Oh, and the rose bushes are the hawthorns. Oh, you had to be careful.
But then you
Because-
finish your pally so fast that Jerry was behind because he'd be needing to bring women a new pally of trees, and maybe there was 12 women with their pally down empty and waiting for him, and he was actually quite busy running the forklift to bring us.
He was very good though.
But when
Yeah,
you
he
finished
was-
your pelly and that happened, then you went and helped your neighbor and
Yeah,
yeah. But Caragana, you could just go like this and
yeah,
There's
just
the
help them so fast.
yeah. But it
They
seemed
were
like
my
the pally
favorite.
never ended,
Yeah.
never empty because
Yeah.
there was just so many in there.
Yeah. They were my favorite.
And when you got home, you counted everything.
Ah.
You counted the potatoes, you counted everything. You were counting.
I still do, to this
Oh, yeah,
day.
yeah.
I still count to
Count.
Isn't that something?
25.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
automatic.
yeah.
When you were counting bundles, were you able to carry on a
Oh,
conversation?
no.
I could.
You talk and all of a sudden, Barry, he was a real sneak.
If the supervisor caught you, he'd come and just come
It's
walking by you. Sometimes he didn't say anything, but you knew
would
what
just
he
Just
meant.
when the body
just-
went by
Just
you.
stand there and watch.
Yeah,
Just
and then
stand
you-
there.
You knew. Stop
Or
talking.
he'd say, it's not tea time.
Yeah.
Even if you were doing your job, you
Yes.
Well,
But if he caught you talking, then when your bundle came down, that'd be one he would grab to
Yeah.
make sure it only
and
had
if you
25.
made a mistake,
And if you
come on.
made a mistake,
Yeah.
he'd come and let you know that you can't talk and count at the same time.
Dave
Always
never,
in a nice way, though.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was never,
Dave never ever did that, but Barry did.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, because Dave Gruber lots of times came around and talked to us
Yes.
while we were counting. And I mean, I'd have to recount because I thought,
Yeah.
he knows how many as he's talking to me, and
He
if
was-
I just lay it down and there could have been 30 in there, so I'd recount to make sure. But Barry didn't really talk as much because he
No.
knew.
No.
He didn't want us talking while we were
All about
counting.
Russian olives.
Those Russian olives, those are the ones I call doinkers.
No, that was red
The
elder.
red devil. But those Russian olives, they had kind of a mist or something come off of them. It made me
Dust.
Yeah,
Powder,
powder.
yeah.
They
That
made
made
you
you-
sneeze and they made you itchy. You
Yeah.
just like when you got a haircut, your skin got itchy.
And watery eyes. Lots
Oh
got-
my goodness! Yeah, they
lots
were
of-
just
for the first
terrible.
while when you got them, they sneezed or
What was
watery eyes.
another one? Was it Seabuck or what? That was kind of like
Yeah.
Russian olive,
Yeah.
but not as bad.
But those Russian olives,
Yeah.
I hated them.
Yeah.
No, I didn't like them either.
Did you enjoy working on the Saxmeyer?
Actually, I did like it.
She
yes.
was good. She was
I
very
did like
good.
working on it, but
She
it
was
seemed
really
like
good at
Johnny
it.
Myers and Jimmy Webster were there fixing them all the time. You know, they were always, and I think that was maybe part of why
Yeah.
we didn't use them no more either, was that they were always breaking down. Or,
If you ever run a baler, you know, it was just like a baler. An arm come around and there was them things that tied the knot, and those knotters were always
Yeah.
breaking. Yeah. My sister worked there. Teresa worked there for years, and she could run that Saxmeyer with a cigarette hanging in her mouth. And when I started to work there, he said, "Oh well, her sister was really good." I hated that stupid Saxmeyer. I couldn't maneuver that thing, not at all.
Ruth Erickson was the most interesting. She used to eat seeds
And
and talk and tie. Seeds would
Yeah.
be flying everywhere, and she'd be tying too.
yeah, that was. It was very interesting. It's actually just shocks me that it has shut down. It's just, I never dreamt that it ever would be.
right.
Because I don't know how many in total it would have employed.
Oh my goodness. If you'd go down the list, how many people were employed there? My gosh. I mean, us women, it was fine for us. We worked in the spring, 6 weeks, in the fall, 6 weeks, and sometimes we hoed in the spring. It was a part-time job and it was good for us.
When John Palliser and his party were exploring the prairies in 1857, they camped in the Squirrel Hills, where they had good wood, water, and grass, but there were signs that they were getting into arid country again. They were advised to load the carts with wood. From then on there would be no more wood, except in the valleys of the rivers. Their course lay due west. As far as the eye could reach, nothing but desolate plains met the view. From the Palliser Expedition, Irene M. Spry.
Hello, I'm Bill Schrader. I've been a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Agroforestry Development Centre since 1981. I think the legacy that myself and all the others, the technicians, the other scientists, the field laborers, have been that we've been able to make a difference on the landscape. Trees have served the farmers, and they have served the farmers very well, and will continue to in the future. So I feel very fortunate.
When you go to Manitoba, Alberta, you see the trees and you think, I wonder if they came.
There's a lot of trees that went to Manitoba.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When the bundles of trees came, my grandmother remembers that it was her job, along with her brothers and sisters, to go out and hoe them and to water them, hauling buckets and buckets. This was the 30s after all. It was a lot of work, but those trees were needed.
Every time I drive anywhere in the prairies, I can see the fruits of my labor. I see the poplar trees that are growing fast, straight. I see the chokecherry trees that are producing fruit people are using for jams and jellies. I see the Scots pine growing stalwartly in realm farmyards. Very rewarding career. And this was, I can't imagine working anywhere else.
January 26, 1910. Dear Sir, in reply to your inquiry regarding trees. As to the trees adding to the value of the property, there is only one answer. We would not be without them now for anything. In the winter they hold the snow from the buildings and keep the wind back, while in the summer they give the farm a very home-like look. The place would indeed look bare without them. They also afford a good shelter for the raspberries, currants, gooseberries, etc., which we planted out. Last spring we planted 24 apple and plum trees, and so we hope to have the beginning of an orchard. I think it is a splendid idea for the government to distribute trees free, as very few could afford the outlay which buying them from a nursery would cause. Signed, Chester Bissett, Winnipeg, Manitoba. March 4th, 1910. Dear Sir, the trees which I first received 5 years ago are a thing of beauty and a joy forever. Yes, I think the trees have added considerably to the value of my property, and I would not have them taken away for $1,000 in gold. Settlers have come from as far away as 15 miles to look at the trees, and I talk to them and give them all the information I can about getting their land ready for tree planting, how it should be prepared, and where to make application for the free distribution. The settlers speak of me as the man at Tyrrell's Lake who has the trees. The farmers have not yet got their land in shape for trees. So many are fresh in the country. I think you will have many applications for trees in the near future. Signed, Solomon King, Warner, Alberta.
I was also very fortunate to have had the opportunity to make a lot of international connections. In 1985, I was selected by the Canadian Forest Service to join a seed collection team that would travel to Siberia. On that mission, we were able to visit with at that time, Soviet scientists that were doing exactly the same work I was doing. We just spoke a different language, but our goals were the same. People like Sergei Kavalin, Galmat Mattis, prominent Russian researchers that had done much work in the area of shelter belts and tree breeding. This led to other trips. I was able to travel with colleagues such as John Court, Jerry Litsuk, to Denmark, back to Siberia, experienced Russian saunas, experienced Russian vodka in the middle of the forest. What an experience. Where else would I have gotten that opportunity? While at the same time serving Canadians as a public servant. Then China. Able to go to China on seed collection missions again. People such as Shan Kai-fu, Zhao Yusen, Wei Dong. All acquaintances that came to Canada to learn from our center. Acquaintance that we were able to make through these excursions to other countries.
Well, one of my privileges, I guess you'd call it, when I worked at this tree nursery was to have Kai-fu, a lady from China, the university in China, come to the tree nursery, and she needed a place to stay. So she stayed with me for oh, I don't know how long, quite a few weeks. And she was an interesting lady to have around. She was fun. And one thing I remember, the poor lady, I had a hide-a-bed kind of in the room she was going to sleep in, and I even bought a new mattress for it. But I put the mattress on wrong, and Kai-Fu is wandering around the house. She's got a sore back, and she's hammering on her back with a spoon, a wooden spoon. I thought, Kai-Fu, what's wrong? And my back is sore. And then I came home from work one day, and she had discovered what the problem was. I had put this new mattress on upside down, so the springs were, she was sleeping on these springs. So we got that sorted out. Anyway, and Kai-Fu, she was, she even offered to have some friends in one night, and she did some cooking for us. She made a Chinese meal for us. It was wonderful. And we visited Bill Schroeder's one night, or one day, and we made, she showed us how to make Chinese dumplings. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, so she was a good person to have around. And then she eventually went back to China, of course, and I was very fortunate to be able to go to China and visit Kai-Fu in her home in Harbin, northern China. And Ellen Barley, another friend of mine who also worked at the Shelter Belt Center, she came with me. She was most surprised one day when I went down to her office, and I said, Ellen, would you like to go to China? Well, she said, I don't know. And she said, I'll let you know. So in about half an hour she came back, sure, I'll go. So off we went. And it wasn't through the Shelter Belt Center that we went. It was on our own hook. And we went with 3 other ladies. And it was a most interesting journey, which I'll never forget. A fellow met us in Calgary and sort of escorted us to Shanghai. And I almost lost my luggage in Shanghai. It was petrified. Anyway, I didn't, and we got off the plane there and then back on again and went to Beijing. And then we stopped in Changchun. We took a train all the way from Beijing up to Changchun, and then up to Changchun, up to Harbin. And Kai-Fu and Yusen, he was another fellow from China who had been at the Shelter Belt Center, whom I'd met before, came and met us, and it was very interesting. I saw where Kai-Fu lived. I didn't meet her husband. He was very ill and in bed. And Kai-Fu and Yusen came and picked me up at the Swan Hotel, I believe it was. The Swan Hotel, it was where we were staying. And in an old Russian car with a driver, and we went over to Kai-Fu's hotel, where we had a delicious supper. Yusen, myself, and Kai-Fu and Yusen's daughter. Yeah, and China was most interesting. It was a culture shock just to be there because of the people. It was unbelievable, wall-to-wall people, which I wasn't used to. And their washroom facilities were something I had never in my life seen. They were terrible. The food was good most of the time. It was fun. And Beijing was terribly smoggy. We could hardly see most of the time. And I fell going across the street and almost got run over with the bicycles coming. I guess there aren't that many there now, but the bicycles were a lot of them then. And it was good to meet Kai-Fu. And we still write to each other at Christmas. And I correspond with her an email occasionally. And she's still doing fine as far as I know. Yeah, so it was a good experience. Yeah. They would have meetings and whatnot, and we would have a barbecue for them. And the barbecue was usually held in what we call the Interpretation Center. It was a greenhouse that had been made into an interpretation center, and there were picnic tables in there where we could all eat, free of bugs and the weather. So I'm out there inspecting this place, getting ready for this barbecue, and in the part of the Interpretation Center we had an ant display, as well as there were some snakes, some ants, and other things, natural history type stuff. And lo and behold, the ants, I discovered, had escaped their where they were living. They were in a glass container with the sides of their container had sort of oily stuff on it, so they couldn't crawl out. But somehow or another, the oily stuff had disappeared, and all the ants had gotten out, and they were all over the greenhouse. What was I going to do? So I thought about this, and so I ran over to the production area and borrowed a vacuum cleaner from them and came back, and I vacuumed up ants for what seemed to me like hours. But I was afraid the ants were going to escape from the vacuum cleaner. I don't remember whether they did or not, but anyhow, to my knowledge, none of the delegates ended up sharing their supper with an ant that I know of, I hope.
January 13th, 1910. Dear Sir, I might say that my plantation is a grand success. It is certainly a great comfort to be sheltered from the cold north and west winds that sweep the country. I have no snowbanks around my buildings as I had before. I would advise every farmer to make a good windbreak, as it will pay 10 times the cost of putting it there. In 1907, I received from your nursery 1,900 trees. Planted May 8th, lost only 6 trees. They now stand 10 feet high and grew over 2 feet last summer. I feel very proud of my trees and thank you for your favor of sending me so many and hope that the good work still continues. Signed, W.G. Hamilton, Hamiota, Manitoba. January 1910. Dear Sir, I am very proud of my trees and I am sure they will add value to the land. Besides, it is a great pleasure to see them in full leaf and see the birds among them. I am very grateful to the department for the interest they have taken in this matter, for really our grove, if it goes on growing, will add much to the home surroundings. Signed, R.D. Bauer, High River, Alberta.
In the excitement of producing much grain, the farmer practiced a system of exclusive cropping. By this continuous cropping, he wore out the fiber and left the soil with little protection against the winds and scorching sun. As the land hunger reached to the park belt and grey bush areas, the trees fell before the settler's axe. In the rush to clear the land, there was no time to regret the falling tree, and so the great park belt areas lost their trees. And when in the 30s, farm prices were depressed and living difficult, on many a bush farm the sale of wood kept the family in food and clothing. As the denuding of the park belt became more general, the problem was even more serious than on the treeless prairie, for the grey bush soils were lighter, and when their natural coverage was removed, they lay exposed to both wind and water erosion. There was no protection against the dry years which were inevitably a part of prairie living. And so when an unprecedented drought struck the western plains, both prairies and park belt soil lay unprotected against the winds. drought belt spread northwards, even to the battlefords. The Russian thistle, symbol of drought and depletion, appeared in areas to the north where it had never grown before. Farmers found they must plant more and more acres to produce very little grain as crops became lean and grain light. They became hard-pressed to meet their obligations, struggling to escape the fate of their neighbors who had to leave the old homestead. Lakes dried up. Miles of prairie that was at one time underwater went back to swampy grass. Rivers that used to hold water all summer dried up 2 weeks after the snow had gone. Sloughs went dry early in the spring. And as the surface drought increased, farm wells began to dry up. And then the rains came again. Rains came again, but the evils of the drought years could not be put right in a day. Something had to be done to help nature correct some of the man-made mistakes of the past. Something had to be done, and done quickly, to conserve all possible moisture and hold it in the soil. Trees held snowdrifts to benefit crops at some distance, and also supply moisture for trees and gardens. In the whole plan for better living on the prairies, it was recognized that trees could play a part. As far back as the pioneer days, a good number of far-sighted farm people had seen the value of trees in home building on the prairies. They saw in trees something which would give permanence to their belief in the Canadian West. And in the rush of other pressing farm work, they took time to care for trees. And from the forestry station at Indian Head, the Dominion government has been sending young trees to farmers all over the West for more than 40 years. Started on the treeless prairie in 1905, the station is now an inspiration to many farm people, an answer to the oft-repeated saying, trees won't grow on the prairie. From the forestry station, trees go out in thousands each spring. Grown from seed, they are available to any farmer in the West who will plant and care for them. Scores of men work through the seasons raising thousands of small trees. The tiny evergreens are coaxed along from seed to small hardy trees. Millions of quick-growing seedlings planted the fall before are plowed up each autumn to be sent to farms the following spring. A plow made especially for the purpose cuts in under the roots of the trees and makes it easy for them to be pulled. It speeds up the harvesting of the young trees, which are tied into bundles of 25. Each autumn there is a great rush of tree harvesting in the hurry to get the small trees out of the ground before the frost comes to freeze them in. They are heeled in by plowing into ditches of rich, moist soil and are ready for quick distribution in the spring. The farmer sees his trees on paper first, for he must plan and order a year ahead. The tree planting experts at Indian Head help him to decide the location of his shelter belts, what trees to plant, and how to lay out a long-term plan, providing for future varieties for a lifetime of tree planting. A main shelter belt of maple and ash is usually advised, with an outer row of caragana. Planning a year ahead, the farmer summer fallows his land in preparation for the young trees, killing weeds and storing moisture so they will have the best possible growing conditions. He runs a fence along his field to protect the hoped-for trees from the livestock. In the spring at the forestry station, thousands of bundles of trees are packed for farms all over Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. When the trees are taken from the trench, their buds are already swollen in readiness for spring. The bundles are assembled and packed in moist moss, the men working carefully so the tree roots won't dry out. The young trees are shipped in refrigerator cars, so the moist roots will stay moist. Every care is taken to see that the trees are in good condition when they reach the farms. Seeing in the small sticks a promise of a large tree belt, the farmer is careful of the young trees, putting them in muddy water at once to protect the moist roots. As early in spring as possible, before the snow moisture has gone from the soil, the farmer plows his trees in, doubling back on the first furrow. This double furrow makes a deep trench for the tree roots. Carefully kept in a pail of water until actual planting, the roots are still moist when, well shaken, they are tramped firmly into the trench. They are so firmly tramped in that even a stiff jerk will not dislodge them. The young caragana seedlings are pruned close to the ground, so their root systems will become well established. The caragana makes a quick-growing temporary hedge, closely knit to break the winds from the garden. After 3 years of growth, it becomes a useful windbreak and snow catcher. The young trees are cultivated regularly for the first 5 years to keep the weeds in check until their own shade will block the weeds. Permanent summer fallow is left on both sides of the belt. When the main shelter belt is 8 to 10 years old, the farmer is well advised to plant evergreens on the inside of the belt. The small evergreens are 4 to 6 years old when the farmer receives them. They grow slowly at first, but more rapidly as they develop. They live for years and give wind protection throughout the seasons. Farmers are warned to keep a close watch for pests. Worms of many kinds will leave devastation in their wake if not kept under control. They bring destruction in many ways by stripping the leaves and boring into the trees. If the farmer doesn't know what the trouble is, he can find out by sending some sample worms to the entomological laboratory at Indian Head. There, specialists examine the worms and send him immediate advice as to their control. Spraying in time will control the pests. Power spraying outfits may be hired from the nearest experimental farm. This power spray penetrates dense foliage and kills the pests. If farmers would organize in groups and send in their requests together, the power spray machines could work to maximum capacity. The charge per shelter belt is $2. Trees will change the bleak face of the prairies. They will bring protection to windswept homes. They will cut down the wind velocity, save moisture in the garden, and bring protection to people and animals. With a good windbreak, it is possible to grow fruit trees which would winter kill without protection. Trees will bring beauty and permanence to farm homes. in the protection of trees, birds will flourish and keep insects under control. As one pioneer woman who has grown many trees says, "Without trees, we'd have left our farm long ago. To us, trees are the hope of the earth, like healthy children to a home. The world without trees would be as a world without children." Trees planted today will gladden the heart as they grow with the children. A symbol of that future when man's will and the bounty of nature will make the prairies beautiful.
I think everybody cried the day the little dog died, eh? There was a
Johnny
little
Macy had a
dog
dog,
there,
yeah.
and it stayed at the PFRA. Everybody looked after it. And
Lisa, was it?
was it
Yeah,
dog?
Lisa.
I don't know.
What's Lisa?
But anyway, did it get run over or did it just die from old age? And it's buried where we used to go in the shed to eat. It's buried out to the sort of southeast under a tree there. Johnny Mazak made a little cross for it and everything.
They found him on the road when Gord was away once and dragged him home and wondered could we keep him. And I said, well, I don't know whether we should keep him or not, but what are we going to do with him? So we kept him. When Gord came back, he was absolutely horrified at this dreadful-looking creature that we'd adopted, because he wasn't a pretty dog. Anyway.
Dora brought up something yesterday, though, that I would like to add a comment to.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you'd like to correct it.
I would like to correct what she said. And it involves a four-legged, miserable dog that arrived here. We had Lisa, which was Jim Elliott's dog.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Lisa became the commissionaire's dog. And Lisa earned her keep, chasing the cows out and the pigs out that wandered in here and barking when people drove up. So when she got run over, I was prepared to let the staff get another dog. And I had in view Boxer, German Shepherd, Collie, something nice. I was away on a business trip and I came back, just got in the office, and a whole delegation showed up at my office door here with something under their arms and half under a coat. Can we keep it? What is it? It was the ugliest, nastiest looking dog. They picked it up somewhere on the road. Margaret Putt, I think, was involved in that. And I'm sitting there, and there's all these big eyes. Can we keep her? I said, well, we'll see. Well, she moved into Dave Gruber's office, basically. And there she stayed till Dave retired. She went with Rodney, but that was not my idea. One that bit people and barked at everybody. And you had to lock her up for field days.
February 17th, 1910. Dear Sir, in reply to your letter regarding the free tree sent me 3 years ago, I would not take $1,000 for my 4 rows of trees now. No farmer should be without a windbreak, as it is no trouble to raise it. I prepared my ground previous to the arrival of the trees, then planted them with a plow, planting every 3rd furrow. I have kept them clean until now. They are able to look after themselves. No one should be without them when they get them free. Signed, Robert Whitten, Fleming, Saskatchewan.
I'd like to spend some time with you to tell you a few stories about Norman Mackenzie Ross, who was superintendent of the tree nursery or forestry farm from 1901 to 1941, a total of 40 years. Norman was born in Callander, Scotland in 1876. At the age of 17, he and his brother Malcolm decided to leave England and traveled to Montreal. Once they got to Montreal, they took the train and ended up at Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan, where Norman started to work on a local farm to gain some experience in an area of farming that he wasn't accustomed to or used to in the old country. Norman soon became a little bit tired of the farming work and found he couldn't handle the oxen very well. So he heard that Angus McKay at the experimental farm was hiring workers. So he traveled 10 miles to the east, talked to Angus, told him he was had experience with horticultural plants, and Angus hired him. That's where Norman got his first experience with trees. Norman eventually decided to return to school and went back to Guelph to the Ontario Agricultural College, hoping to get his degree in agriculture. After a year, he grew tired of this, and much to the chagrin of his father, who was still back in England, he quit and moved back west to again work at the experimental farm. His father was quite upset and contacted Norman and says if he did not get back to school, he would expect no further funding. So Norman heeded this warning and returned to the agricultural school in Guelph and finished with a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture. He saw an ad in the paper for forest survey work in the US, so he contacted the then director of forestry in the USDA, asking if he could get a job. The director said the positions were all filled, but if he would be willing to take some training in forestry and become a formally trained forester, then he may be considered. So Norman, from that point on, went to the Biltmore School of Forestry in Biltmore, North Carolina, under the tutelage of Carl Schenck. Norman ended up being one of the top students, and as a reward, Dr. Schenck took Norman with him back to Germany, where he further studied forestry for another 6 months. Upon his graduation, Norman was able to obtain employment with L.U. Stewart, who was then the director of forestry with the newly formed Department of Interior. Stewart had this vision, with the great support of Sifton at the time, who was the Minister of the Interior, to establish a tree planting program in the prairies. Norman Ross was Stewart's man. Ross was sent to Manitoba to solicit a number of farmers to try this new experimental program in tree planting. He was so successful that he was given funding to hire additional staff to expand the program. But he needed seedlings, so he established nurseries with his old friend Angus McKay at Indian Head Experimental Farm, but with the idea that he would develop his own nursery, or the Department of Interior's own nursery, at a new site, and hence sought out a nursery and found land south of Indian Head, which was to become the Dominion Forest Nursery Station. He began work on the nursery in 1903 and produced the first seedlings from this nursery in 1904.
January 9th, 1910. Dear Sir, re your inquiry about tree plantations supplied by the government. I am prouder of these trees than anything else on the farm. Everybody who sees the trees is reminded that this is what he lacks, and most people try and obtain some from the government. From my place, I can see 3 other tree plantations belonging to different farmers, and they improve the look of the country very much. They are already landmarks in this prairie country. I don't know of any good plantations except those planted under government auspices. Signed J.S. Hopkins, Cardiff, Saskatchewan.
It was the people you enjoyed working with them, but it was the people that you shared them with every day.
He came from Scotland in 1913, and he was the superintendent at the nursery from 1942 to 58.
I don't think I ever saw him come to work in anything really but a suit and a tie. He smoked like a train. You know, sometimes I could always tell his moods by how many cigarettes he had going in the ashtray. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he'd get pretty upset sometimes.
You could argue your point in that, and if he saw the good side of it, he went that way, but if not, he went his way, which that's only right.
A great group of people. You felt like you were doing something good, and mostly just a team that I thought really worked together well, and so I really enjoyed going to work.
Just kind of felt like I should be I think these new students come to town, I should make them feel welcome, right? And so we always had a ball team, a PFA ball team, and it always was made up of students, and a lot of them had never played ball before, so we never win a lot of games, but it was always fun. We just take everybody that we could, and we just go out there and make fools of ourselves.
I need to tell you a little bit, though, about how Norman accomplished this work. One of his biggest challenges was finding labor. At that time, farming was booming in the West. Farm workers were very difficult to find. Plus, the work at the tree nursery was very laborious. Hard work, long hours, in all kinds of weather. Mud, snow, rain, heat, flies. It was not a great working environment, and everything was done by hand. So what was Norman to do? Well, it just so happened that the town of Indian Head had a community called Germantown. The people of Germantown were having a difficult time finding employment. And when they did find employment, they were finding that they were getting much less pay than other people that were hired to do the same work. Norman saw this as an opportunity. Through interpreters, because most of the people in Germantown did not speak English, he solicited their help. He went to them and told them that he could provide them with work. He said it would be hard work, but it would be rewarding, and there was high demand for the tree seedlings that they were growing. He started first by hiring some of the men folk. They were trained to do the specialized work by Norman, again through an interpreter, but they learned quickly. A lot of them had done this type of work back in the old country, so they weren't adverse to the hard, difficult work that Norman expected them to do. But soon labor shortages became so great that even the Germantown men were finding employment on the surrounding farms. What to do? Norman decided that, what about the women? They seemed to be a hard-working lot. And so he went and talked to them and said, would you like to work during the day, but on a seasonal basis? What I need is people I can hire when I need them, and I can send them home when I don't need them. This suited the women fine. They could work just during short periods and be back home with their family during most of the year. When Norman needed them was mainly to make hoe weeds and to make cuttings in the fall. One of the things that were a problem was that there was some resistance in Ottawa for Norman to be hiring these what were called alien enemies during the World War I. One interesting story, which I could not find documented anywhere, but it was in some of Norman's notes, was that sometimes, mysteriously, several horses would die, and he'd have to buy new horses. Well, in actuality, what he was doing is he was using the money that was appropriated for the horses to help offset the costs of hiring the Germantown women. Very innovative way to get around the bureaucracy of Ottawa. One thing that Norman was able to do with the Germantown women was have a ready, set cadre of workers that would come to work at a moment's notice. He made it easy for them, though. He took one of his trusted teamsters. A teamster was one of his most valued employees. It was the people who managed and operated the horses. One of his teamsters, Albert Page, one morning was dispatched to Germantown to pick up 4 women to come back to the nursery to make willow cuttings for shipping the following spring. The day was November 11th, 1911. They worked hard that day, the 4 women, and it was time to return home. Albert loaded them in the buckboard wagon, and they proceeded to return to town. When they got to town, they noticed there was a train just pulling out of the station. Steam was whistling out of its stack. The whistle was blowing, making quite a noise. This noise startled the horses, and the buckboard began to run, or the horses began to run out of control. Albert tried to rein in the horses, but one of the women sitting beside him panicked, grabbed the rein, steered the horses off to the side. They hit a culvert. The buckboard rolled. All 4 women and Albert were thrown from the buckboard, landing in the ditch. One lady, Susie Barrow, didn't move. She died instantly when she hit the ground. The doctor's report, the coroner's report, stated that she hit the ground. She had a fractured rib which punctured her heart, killing her instantly. 2 other ladies one had a dislocated shoulder, another one had a broken arm. One lady was not hurt at all, and Albert escaped injury. 1 horse was dead. The police report stated that this was not Albert's fault. He contacted his superior in Ottawa, telling him this tragic news. The then director of forestry, Mr. Campbell, said, well, it's not really our fault. We really can't do much about it. But we probably can replace the horse. Ross said, okay. What about the women? Well, maybe we can pay for the medical bills. Okay, that would seem fine. What about the Barrow family? Well, don't worry about that. If they don't say anything, we won't worry about it. Anyway, a week later, the Minister of Agriculture received a very pointed letter from the lawyer for the Burrell family. Susie Burrell's husband was an invalid. He couldn't work. He could just do light duty at best. 4 infant children at home. one disabled, one arm that would not function properly, and had no chance for employment. A true tragic story. A woman that was working for 22.5 cents an hour to support her family. Now they had nothing. Well, I think this bothered Norman, and he got back to Campbell and says, look, this is causing a lot of trouble. And I think it was. The Germantown people were outraged that nothing was being done. And Norman basically said, if we don't do something, I will never get another Germantown man or woman to work at the forest nursery station again. Campbell says, well, I don't agree with this. I don't think we're obligated to pay them anything. Let's pay them, we'll pay the funeral costs. $80. Norman went back to Joseph Burrell, who's Susie's husband, said to an interpreter, this is what we're prepared to offer. You could tell Norman could tell he was not happy, and the language barrier was obviously a difficulty that they could not communicate properly. Well, after that, Norman went back to Campbell and says, is there anything more we can do? Because I'm afraid this is paying the funeral costs is not going to settle anything. In a letter from Campbell to the deputy minister at the time, he stated that Norman Ross was really concerned that they were going to lose a number of workers over this incident. And would it be possible for Parliament to, through a vote, make an appropriation of $300 to the Burrell family? Next time, Parliament set within days, voted on the appropriation, and it was passed. Norman Ross took the $300, wrote the $300 check. In those days, Norman wrote the check, signed his own name, gave it to Joseph Burrell, and all was good.
January 25th, 1910. Dear Sir, the success is absolute, and the growth has far exceeded my anticipation. Many people have been in to look at the trees, but I fear that the great majority are content to live in the present alone and do not care to do anything for the future. Thanking you for the trees you have sent me in 4 different years, and trusting, when I get more ground in a suitable condition, that you will let me have some more. Signed, C.A.J. Sharman, Red Deer, Alberta.
Can you tell us about Martha the snake?
I think Patty Zombathy, she was a tour guide. She found Martha out in the gardens there one day. And so we brought her in, and Gord had them build her a big cage. One day I went out there and she'd had babies, and there were hundreds of these little snakes, about as big as a shoelace. Oh, they were everywhere. And snakes don't look after their babies, so I had to catch them all. It took me about a week, I think, to catch these all and move them down to the creek. Another day a squirrel got into the office. I guess I left the door open or something, and I heard, Dora, there's a squirrel in my office, and it ran into Gord's office right under his desk, across his feet, and he wasn't too impressed. So I had to bar off the hall, and I had to escort the squirrel out of the building. Oh, dear.
Don Wanjo and I went out to do one together, and we saw a sign, and it said, beware of dog, when we drove in. We got out of the car, and we're looking around for, the big nasty dog, and there's no farmer at the time. And all of a sudden, from the house, ran this little fluffy dog, like very small little poodle-like thing. And we're like, that's the beware of dog is for that? Like, come on, that's funny. So we started walking towards the shop, because we thought we could hear the farmer in the shop. And we got maybe 20 feet away from the vehicle, and this little white dog was happy and with us. And we're laughing about the sign, and then all of a sudden we heard, woof, woof. And we turned around, and sure enough, that was the dog that the sign was for, was coming around the house. And it was some very large, nasty-looking creature. So we both looked at each other and we had a decision. It was either the shop or the truck, and the truck was closer. So we turned around and ran for the truck. Both jumped in. Sure enough, dog dropped up and grabbed the handle of the government vehicle, and he started trying to rip the handle off the vehicle. So yeah, we made a good choice.
1930, the Mackenzie King government fell to R.B. Bennett. Their idea was to transfer the responsibility for all natural resources, including forestry, to the provincial government. This put the tree nursery, or the forest nursery stations at Indian Head and Sutherland in serious jeopardy. In all likelihood, they would be closed. So the legislature in Saskatchewan passed a motion giving full support to the continuation of the forest nursery stations at Indian Head and Saskatoon or Sutherland to be maintained by the new Department of Agriculture. The Department of Interior, which the forest nursery stations originally were part of, was disbanded. Well, Ross saw this as an opportunity. He in fact lost all his tree inspectors. Often Norman Ross would say, "My most valued employees are the tree inspectors. They are the people that meet with the farmers, work with the farmers, and are really why we have all the beautiful and functional shelter belts across the prairies." However, in 1931, they all lost their jobs. This was a serious blow to the tree planting program. The two forest nurseries at Sutherland and Indian Head were providing about 5 million trees per year to farmers. But there was no support to the farmers about planning the shelter belts, how to maintain them. All that they could do was answer letters that were sent to them at either Indian Head or Sutherland. So as a result, tree plantings were failing. Well, in 1935, the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Act came into effect. Ross saw this as a tremendous opportunity. He went to the legislators that were drafting this legislation and said, "We have to have tree culture as part of the PFRA Act." So as a result, tree culture became an integral part of the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Act, thanks to Norman Ross. Ross also saw this as an opportunity to bring back the tree inspectors. He didn't call them tree inspectors because Ottawa had pretty long memories. He called them tree planting supervisors. And they would be responsible for the projects that were funded under the PFRA Act. Conquest, Aneroid, Lyleton, these areas where trees were being planted by the millions to prevent soil erosion.
Good.
We'd be in the alien plot for probably 2 months, 2.5 months, healing the trees in. Yeah, they were healed in with a cat. And then we'd get a wet spring, and it was just slogging trees out to the road because you couldn't get in with any equipment, so you'd haul them out to the road. And it was a lot of tough work. It was Larry Shaw. There was this much of Larry's rubber boots sticking out of the mud. They were tall rubber boots, so there was an inch. They were probably 16-inch rubber boots. And he couldn't move. He couldn't even get his feet out of the rubber boots. We took the skid steer in, and it was me and someone else on the forks of the skid steer. And Larry put his arm around my neck and the other guy's neck, and then they lifted with the skid steer. That's the only way we could get him out of the mud. And his boots stayed there. They were probably full of water the next day because they were only this far above the ground.
And I remember this one time we were out there and we were hauling. We had cut them off, and we had trimmed them all up and cut them into lengths and put them on the wagons, and then we'd take them in, and they used to actually saw them up into stove lengths, and we would sell the wood here in town. But this one particular time we were out there, and all of a sudden you look and the sky got black, and the clouds were swirling like this, and we got about halfway in, and we were riding on the wagon on top of these trees that we had cut. And all of a sudden, Johnny Ball was on the tractor, and he said, "Get under the wagon, you guys." We jumped off and got under the wagon, and just as he said that, these huge hailstones come down, and thunk! One guy got hit on the arm and split his arm wide open. And it lasted for maybe 2 or 3 minutes or so, and then it was over with. But when we went into the yard, all the greenhouses, all the glass was smashed, and even our cars had huge bumps in them from this storm.
I remember the storm that took the trees away, the big plow wind that blew down the big poplars that my great-grandparents had planted in the 1920s. They were planted as shelter belt from the northwest wind to keep the snow from piling up in the yard. And over time they became their own little woods. We'd add a new row every decade. They turned this place from a homestead on the bald prairie to a home, to a farm. And it's just not the same anymore without those trees.
Yeah, they were packed, and then there was a truck, and they went out on a conveyor belt into the truck, and the truck would deliver wherever.
Yeah, if they were going to Alberta or wherever, yes. And if when we were done planting, then sometimes you went hoeing for a bit. You'd see them drive by in the truck, but not always that they stopped and said anything. And if you were sitting and you seen them coming, you quick jumped up, to me. And I mean, even if it was raining, lots of times our supervisor would let us go in the trees to get out of the rain. Yeah. There was times while we were at work, we would pray that it was raining, because if we got laid off at 11 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock, lots of times a group of us would go to the bar. We'd sit in the bar until closing, till sometimes we were still in there when our husbands came off work at 5. Then we'd always have a wind up at the end of the fall, because we work, 8 weeks in the spring, something like that, and 10, 12 weeks sometime in the fall, depending on how many trees. Yeah. And then the women would always have a wind up in the fall. Go out for supper to a place, and that's why we
called the tree pluckers.
Tree pluckers, because we couldn't have a liquor
permit or
liquor permit or whatever in the Rainbow.
And then we did get jackets with tree pluckers.
We had lots of different jackets.
That's right.
I just threw my first one away the other day, the green one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with that crest.
Yeah, with that crest.
So you could have brought it to the museum.
Yeah,
brought it for the museum.
A big poplar tree transplanted itself from our shelter belt. Either the wind or a bird carried the seed about a quarter-mile north of the farm, right before the intersection of the two roads. When I'm driving home in the dark, whenever I see that big poplar standing alone, I know that the turn's coming up. I know that I'm almost home.